Good morning, folks. So today we are looking at chapter 18 of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and we're going to use Karl Marx's idea, his notion of religion and his notion of class struggle as a theoretical lens in order to help us make sense of chapter 18. Chapter 18 of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings centers around a church revival that takes place in Stamps. Before giving readers a glimpse of the church revival, Maya spends a great amount of time describing the cotton pickers and the workers that come into Mama's store. She marks how overworked and taken advantage of they are, as well as lays bare some of her bold claims regarding their willingness to be exploited. Quote, "I thought them all hateful to have allowed themselves to be worked like oxen, and even more shameful to try to pretend that things were not as bad as they were," end quote. Maya places a good amount of blame of the exploitation on the victims, stating that they allow it to happen and that they pretend it isn't happening. She goes even further when she overhears in the store that after a hard day of being overworked, many of her fellow African American community members plan to attend the church revival rather than getting some much needed rest. Quote, "The idea came to me that my people may be a race of masochists, and that not only was it our fate to live the poorest, roughest life, but that we liked it like that," end quote. A masochist is someone who enjoys having pain inflicted upon them, or somebody who gets pleasure out of being used. By calling the exploited African American workers masochists, not only is Maya saying that it's their fault that they're being taken advantage of by white people, but she wonders whether they enjoy it or seek it somehow. By the time Maya takes the reader to the church revival, it becomes clear that what Maya witnesses there causes her to reconsider her previous ideas about African Americans wanting to be taken advantage of and allowing themselves to be exploited by their white oppressors. In the revival, the preacher's sermon focuses on the notion of charity and the unusual way it is used in the Bible. Maya quotes the preacher and describes his account of charity. Quote, "As I understand it, charity vaunteth not itself. It is not puffed up." He blew himself up with a deep breath to give us the picture of what charity was not. Charity don't go around saying, "I give you food and I give you clothes, and by rights, you ought to thank me." The congregation knew whom he was talking about and voiced agreement with his analysis, end quote. Readers can here make the inference that the preacher is talking about white people who keep African Americans oppressed through credit and debt. They give, but then expect more in return than what was given. This is the opposite of charity, according to the preacher. Maya goes on to explain how the people in the congregation receive the preacher's sermon, describing how it energizes them and gives them hope. Quote, "Their faces shone with the delight of their souls. The mean white folks were going to get their comeuppance." Wasn't that what the minister said? And wasn't he quoting from the words of God himself? They had been refreshed with the hope of revenge and the promise of justice, end quote. Oh no, I'm sorry. It keeps going. The preacher says, I said charity. Whoa, charity. I don't want nothing for itself. It don't want to be boss man. Whoa. I don't want to be a head man. Whoa. It don't want to be a foreman. Wah. I'm talking about charity. It don't want, oh Lord, help me tonight. It don't want to be bowed and scraped at. And this is the end of the quote. So there are two big ideas that are articulated here. Two big ideas that get everybody in the congregation going and give Maya a new perspective on how her fellow African American community members cope with being exploited. The first idea is that God will deliver revenge upon their white oppressors, and the second idea is that this will result in a world that exists without bosses, headmen, and foremen. The chapter ends on a complexing note, however. After walking back from the revival, Maya describes the energy of the revival wearing off and reality setting in. Quote, reality began its tedious crawl back into their reasoning. After all, they were needy and hungry and despised and dispossessed, and sinners the world over were in the driver's seat. How long, merciful Father, how long? End quote. By choosing to end the chapter with the cold reality that the rich whites were in control and the hardworking black people of Stamps were left wanting, Maya leaves the reader puzzled as to how to actually feel about the church revival. She leaves the reader lingering between the two poles she establishes in the chapter. On the one hand, the idea that African Americans are allowing themselves to be exploited, and on the other, the idea that they are being good proponents of the true notion of charity and are patiently awaiting the day when the Lord will deliver justice upon the whites and the blacks will find their bossless peace in heaven. The German philosopher Karl Marx believed that all of history was the history of class struggle, or the history of the struggle between those who rule and those who are ruled. He is often quoted for saying that religion is, quote, the opium of the masses, or the opium of the people. This is often interpreted to mean that religion, like opium, which is the drug that's, the active agent in like heroin, so he's often interpreted to mean that religion, like opium, drugs people into accepting horrible circumstances. In other words, he's often understood to mean that instead of fighting to make the world a better place, a more equitable place today, religion gets people to accept that the world is horrible, accept that they're being taken advantage of, and place all of their hopes and dreams on the idea that when they die, their reward that they lacked on earth will finally be delivered. So that's how it's often interpreted. However, there's more to Marx's quote than what gets repeated. The quote in its entirety from Marx's critique of Hegel's philosophy of law states, quote, religious distress is at the same time the expression of real distress and the protest against real distress. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, just as it is the spirit of a spiritless situation. It is the opium of the people. The line, and that's the end of the quote, the line stating that religion is the opium of the people is still very much here, but given the larger context, it makes us reconsider what opium is and what it does. It is a painkiller. It's often used when people are like in morphine, when people are sick in the hospital. It makes people feel good who are suffering, but it doesn't fix the reason they are suffering. It just eases the pain. The idea that religion is a form of protest and that it is spirit and heart where there are none are even more interesting to consider, but I'm going to leave that ground uncovered for your contemplation. To me, that's a really powerful thing he says about religion, but I don't want to unpack it for you. Because for today's assignment, I want you to, in your own words, analyze Marx's quote, and then explain whether you think Maya Angelou is stating something similar to Marx in chapter 18 or something different. You need to use quotes from both Marx and from Angelou to support your response. And I'm going to include a copy of this mini lesson so that if any of the quotes that I pulled from my own analysis, if you find them useful, it'll help you with your evidence finding process. And that's it.